Hello, glad to see you on the channel. Subscribe, give a like, and don't forget to leave a comment. Enjoy watching.
It started the same way every Thursday morning did for the last 12 years. Black coffee in my left hand. Keycard swipe at 7:52. Small nod to Carol at reception, who never once learned to pronounce my last name. I walked through those glass doors like I always did, on autopilot, mind already sifting through the mess left in the inbox overnight. I didn't see it coming. That was the part that got me. Not the actual firing, no, that had been coming like slow rot in the beams. It was the way they smiled while they did it that got under my skin. I was halfway through my first cup when I got the ping. Subject line, quick sync, HR and Kyle. No details, no agenda, just 15 minutes on the calendar dropped in by someone who usually didn't know I existed. I remember looking at it and thinking, that's weird. I wasn't behind on anything, hadn't pissed off anyone, not recently, anyway, and my team was hitting numbers. So I figured maybe it was some new policy rollout or one of those compliance trainings they like to sneak in under discussions. I walked into that beige little conference room, the one with the flickering overhead light they never bothered fixing, and Kyle Moran was already sitting there. Kyle had that look people get when they've been practicing fake sincerity in the mirror. Late 30s, freshly promoted, always trying to balance the cool dad energy with CEO on the rise posture. He stood up like we were old buddies. Hey, man, come on in. Thanks for making time. I knew right then. HR was already seated, looking a little too stiff, not even pretending to check emails or shuffle papers like they usually did in these kinds of setups. No coffee, no folders. Just that tight little smile and a notepad they didn't write on. The door clicked shut behind me, and suddenly I felt like I'd walked into my own funeral. Kyle launched right into it, no warm-up. Said something about a tough environment and strategic shifts in our organizational direction. I stopped hearing the words after, we're making some tough calls, and your role has been impacted. That's corporate 4, you're out, buddy. I sat there for a second, just letting it hit, letting it sit in my bones. Then Kyle said the part that stuck with me. We really value everything you've done here. You've been a real pillar. That's why we're giving you 2 full weeks to transition out gracefully. 2 weeks. After 12 years. No severance package. No retention bonus. Not even a box of donuts. Just 2 weeks and a canned compliment. Like I was being given a gold star and told to get the hell out quietly. And I did something that surprised even me. I didn't get angry. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't throw my coffee in his face or walk out slamming doors like in a Netflix drama. I smiled. A long, calm, deliberate smile. The kind that says, I see you. And I'll remember. I shook Kyle's hand, looked him in the eye, and said, thanks for the opportunity. That phrase, I'd heard it 100 times from junior hires. It always sounded hollow. Now I knew how much it could sting. They gave me a clean-out deadline, an escort offer from security, which I politely declined, and a non-compete agreement I never signed. The walk back to my desk felt surreal. People noticed. They always notice. But nobody said anything. One guy nodded at me like he knew. Carol looked up and asked if I was going home early. I just told her I had a meeting. That afternoon, I sat at my desk and stared at the monitor for an hour. The spreadsheet I was working on before the meeting still opened, cursor blinking like it was waiting for me to breathe. I opened a folder marked Legacy Projects I'd built that from scratch 5 years ago. Now it'd be handed off to some 28-year-old MBA with a podcast and a TikTok brand. Let me tell you something about loyalty. It doesn't mean a damn thing to the people in the top-floor glass offices. You give them holidays, nights, weekends, even birthdays. You cancel dinner plans because the network went down. You drive in during snowstorms to make sure some VIP client's data migration doesn't crash. And then one day someone half your age, with a tighter jawline and a bigger buzzword vocabulary, decides you're not forward-looking enough. But what do? Scream? Sue? Cry into your ergonomic chair? Nah, you take the high road. That's what I did. I packed up my stuff, cleared out the pictures of my kids, left the bottle of bourbon in the drawer for whoever inherited my desk, and walked out the door like a damn gentleman. But you know the thing about the high road? Sometimes it leads right to the edge of a cliff. And the people who think they've won, they never see it coming. What would you do if your boss stabbed you in the back like this? Tell me, would you walk away clean? Or would you start planning your move the second the door hit your back? Because that's exactly what I did. And if you think this is the part where I just ride off into the sunset with my dignity and a LinkedIn post about resilience, you don't know me at all. You see, I wasn't just leaving a job. I was leaving a battlefield. And you better believe I had unfinished business. The worst part about being fired isn't the actual moment when they tell you you're done. It's what comes after, the slow crawl of silence and small humiliations that follows you like a bad smell. My last day passed without a word from half the office, and I couldn't decide if they were ashamed for me, scared for themselves, or just didn't give a damn. Probably a bit of all three. People avoid a man who reminds them they might be next. I cleaned out my desk with the same hands that built half the damn infrastructure they still run on, took the framed picture of Diane and the kids, the broken coffee mug that said, "World's okayest employee," and the backup drive I always kept tucked in the drawer. Just in case. Turns out that just in case instinct might have been the smartest thing I ever did. The office felt like a graveyard during my final hours. Conversations died when I walked by, forced smiles cracked in the corners of people's faces, and nobody asked me if I wanted a farewell lunch or a goodbye card. Jason, the kid I trained 3 years ago, the one who used to ask me everything from password resets to client call etiquette, had taken my seat before the door closed behind me. Literally, they moved him into my old office. Same chair, same monitors, same barely functioning printer. I saw him through the glass while I was carrying my things out, and he didn't even look up. Now, I want to be angry at Jason. I want to call him an ungrateful little bastard who stepped on the same shoulders that lifted him. But deep down, I know what happened. Kyle needed a puppet. Someone eager, inexperienced enough to be molded, but not smart enough to notice he was being used. And Jason? He fit that mold like a hand in a glove. Watching him fumble through my systems from a distance felt like watching a house of cards trying to withstand a breeze. Within a week of my exit, they were already behind on 2 of my biggest projects. A contract renewal I'd queued up went into limbo, and I heard, through the grapevine, that a major client flagged the transition as concerning. That was their corporate speak for, "What the hell is happening over there?" I started looking for jobs immediately, updating my resume with a fake cheer I didn't believe in, crafting cover letters that screamed team player, even as my gut churned with bitterness. But let me tell you something, there's a kind of quiet humiliation in being told, over and over again, that you're not quite the right fit, which is just another way of saying you're too old, too expensive, too seasoned. One recruiter actually said I might be too established for the fast-paced, high-energy culture they were nurturing. I laughed when I got off that call. Too established, as if that's a flaw. That's like telling a doctor he's seen too many patients. Diane tried to keep things light. She's better than me at swallowing anger, though I caught her crying in the kitchen once when she thought I was still asleep. We started slashing subscriptions, cooked at home more, and talked about maybe pushing the Florida trip to next year. "We'll be fine," she kept saying, like a prayer or a spell. But her eyes told a different story. They darted more when we talked about bills, and she paused longer before swiping her card at the grocery store. I knew this wasn't just a layoff. It was a crack in the life we'd built. A slow, creeping fracture. One night, I was going through old backup files, partly out of habit, partly out of spite, and I started to notice something. Some approval chains looked off. There were forms that had my name on them, but the details weren't familiar. Budgets adjusted without my signature. Timelines shifted after I handed them off. I remembered one contract in particular, a vendor deal I'd worked on for weeks, had suddenly jumped in value before it was finalized. At the time, I chalked it up to last-minute changes, but now it smelled different. Like something had been quietly altered when no one was looking. The more I dug, the more I found. Meeting minutes where I'd supposedly agreed to things I never recalled discussing. Approval stamps I didn't remember giving. Documents that felt tampered with, like someone had retrofitted my involvement to cover their own tracks. It wasn't just sloppiness, it was calculated. Deliberate. I started to get that old feeling in my gut, the one I used to get when a client was lying or a junior analyst was trying to fudge numbers in a report. My instincts were telling me this wasn't just carelessness or incompetence. This was something darker. I reached out to an old friend, Linda, who still worked in finance. We weren't close, but we'd always had a mutual respect. She once called me the only guy in IT who speaks human. I asked if she had noticed anything weird with recent approvals, anything odd in how budget shifts were being handled since I left. Her response was short. Too short. Can't talk now. Let's grab coffee this week. That's not what you say unless there's something you don't want to put in writing. I started sleeping less. My head would hit the pillow, but the wheels wouldn't stop turning. Jason was in over his head, Kyle was playing puppet master, and somewhere in that chain, someone was doctoring records. Maybe to push something through. Maybe to cover something up. I didn't know yet. But I knew this much. It wasn't just that they'd pushed me out. It was how they did it, and what they needed to hide to make it work. That betrayal, the one that started as a slow burn, was now boiling. And I wasn't just angry anymore. I was curious. And curiosity, in the hands of someone with nothing to lose, can be a very dangerous thing. We met at that little coffee shop just off Main, the one with the chipped mugs and the peeling paint on the window frames, the kind of place people used to call charming before Starbucks arrived and sucked all the personality out of morning caffeine. Linda sat at the far booth, away from the door, sunglasses on and a knit hat pulled low like she was dodging paparazzi. She looked up when I walked in, and for a second, I swear she looked like she regretted texting me. That kind of regret you get right before doing something you can't walk back. She didn't even bother with small talk, didn't ask how I'd been or if I found a new gig or how Diane was holding up. She got right into it. Leaned across the table like she was afraid the foam on her latte might be listening. Jason screwed up, she said, voice low, eyes darting toward the window. And not like, oops, wrong color on the PowerPoint, screwed up. I mean, client lost 6 figures and is threatening to walk kind of screwed up. I sat back and let her keep going. Turns out, Jason sent a contract to one of our legacy clients, a big one, with a name that sits on our case studies like a trophy, and it had the wrong pricing tier embedded in the terms. Not just wrong by a little, wrong by a lot. 6 figures worth. The client noticed 2 weeks after signing when billing started, and now legal was involved. Kyle, apparently, had tried to sweep it under the rug, and the CFO, a tight-lipped guy named Edgar Reeves, who always reminded me of a man who smiled exactly once in 1998 and didn't enjoy it, signed off on a revised interpretation of the contract and the internal system. Translation: they were trying to retroactively clean the mess with corporate bleach. Linda didn't come to me just because she was angry. She came because she was scared. Scared that the ship was taking on water and Kyle was too busy posing for LinkedIn thought leader selfies to plug the holes. And the worst part? She told me this wasn't the first time. A few months before I got canned, Kyle and Edgar had started shifting budget numbers between departments, just a few thousand here, a little padding there. Enough to make quarterly reports sparkle for the board, but not enough to raise alarms. At least, that's what they thought. I didn't say much during that coffee. I nodded, made some notes in my head, and asked her to send me anything she could, discreetly. She nodded, but I could see the weight of it pressing down on her. This wasn't just gossip over a cappuccino. This was her career, and maybe more, sitting on the edge of a razor. And me? I wasn't just some bitter ex-employee anymore. I was the guy holding receipts. That night, I pulled out the old backup drive, the one I'd taken home purely out of routine, telling myself it was just a personal archive in case I ever needed references for tax season or maybe to remember who worked on what if I got freelance work. I hadn't expected it to be anything more than digital nostalgia. But now, it was gold. I opened folder after folder, some labeled by project, others by quarter, all arranged the way only someone like me, who lived in organized chaos, would understand. And buried in the Q2 folder from 2 years ago, I found an email thread that damn near knocked the breath out of me. It was a conversation between Kyle, Edgar, and one of the junior analysts, and it wasn't just careless wording or vague misstatements. It was explicit. They were discussing ways to reallocate surplus from underperforming departments to enhance board perception. That's not business strategy. That's fraud with a smile. There were spreadsheets attached. I opened them, recognizing the color coding, the formulas, the fake projections slipped into the executive summary versions. They doctored financials to show profit growth that didn't exist. And they'd done it with a kind of casual boldness that only comes when people think they'll never be caught. I kept reading, email after email, watching my old boss unravel in plain text. There were directives to keep things internal, notes on how to phrase updates to investors, and references to bonuses that would trigger if certain metrics were met. Fabricated metrics. You can't get performance bonuses for fake wins. Well, I mean, you can, but not legally. The more I read, the more my pulse pounded. This wasn't just about me getting screwed over. This was a time bomb, and they had been hiding the wires behind PowerPoint decks and buzzwords. I remember thinking, if this ever saw the light of day, it wouldn't just freeze the IPO they were chasing. It might actually land someone in a courtroom. Or worse. I printed hard copies. I encrypted everything I found. I backed it up twice, once on a second drive, once in a cloud folder under a fake name. I wasn't stupid. I knew if I was going to do anything with this, I had to do it smart. Corporate scandal isn't like a bar fight. You don't just punch and walk away. You expose the cracks, and then you wait for the building to fall under its own weight. For years, I'd walked the line, followed the rules, played the company man. I didn't want revenge. I wanted justice. And justice, in this world, requires proof. Now I had it. And the funny thing? All this time, they thought I was gone. Forgotten. But they didn't realize the guy they tossed aside like old hardware was still connected to the system, and he was about to flip the damn switch. I wasn't just holding a grudge anymore. I was holding the matchbox. And the building? It was dry as hell. There's a point in every story where anger stops being loud and messy and starts getting very, very quiet. That's the kind of anger that plans, the kind that moves pieces on the board without anyone noticing the game's already begun. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of reheated coffee, Diane upstairs asleep, the house wrapped in that kind of late-night silence that makes everything feel sharper. I stared at the pile of evidence on my laptop, those little digital breadcrumbs of fraud and ego, and I realized I was holding something much more dangerous than resentment. I was holding leverage. I knew I couldn't go to HR. They'd bury it before it hit the air. I couldn't go to legal. Their in-house team practically shared an office with Kyle and had been rubber-stamping his bullshit for years. No, I needed someone outside the building, someone who didn't have skin in the game, someone who didn't owe Kyle a favor or care about quarterly optics. That's when I thought of her, Sadie Mercer. Sadie ran a scrappy local business podcast, The Ledger, they called it, mostly interviews with small business owners, economic trends, startup horror stories, the kind of show you listen to during your commute because it makes you feel like you're learning something. But she was more than just a podcaster, she was a journalist, an old-school dig-for-the-truth type who still believed that uncovering the dirt was a noble cause. We'd met once, years ago, when the company I worked for sponsored one of her live panels. I remembered her because she didn't ask the usual softball questions. She asked about ethics, whistleblowers, and accountability. At the time, I'd respected her. Now, I needed her. I created a burner email, set up a VPN, and sent her a message late at night, short, sharp, enough to get her attention without giving away who I was. You're sitting on a powder keg. The financials behind the upcoming IPO at Altus Systems are cooked. I have documents. If you're interested, I'll send proof. Less than 12 hours later, I got a response. Prove it. That was all she said. That's how I knew she was serious. I spent the next few days scrubbing metadata, redacting names, removing anything that could trace back to me directly, but not enough to make it useless. I wanted the documents to speak for themselves. Budget shifted after the fact. Emails instructing analysts to clean performance reports. Spreadsheets with matching totals but broken formulas. The kind of stuff you wouldn't notice unless you knew where to look. And trust me, I knew exactly where to look. I didn't dump everything at once. I gave her pieces. A spreadsheet here. An email chain there. Just enough to keep her hungry, but not so much that she'd get sloppy. We exchanged messages like ghosts, no names, no personal stories, just facts and files. She asked smart questions, the kind that told me she wasn't just interested in a headline. She wanted a bombshell with legs, something that would stick. And once she had enough, she told me she was moving forward. Meanwhile, the circus at Altus was in full swing. Press releases flew out like candy from a parade float. Phrases like disruptive innovation and scalable synergy were being vomited across every social channel. Kyle showed up on a business tech panel, smiling like he'd just solved world hunger, talking about culture-first growth and mission-driven leadership, which was hilarious considering I'd once watched him fire an intern for asking if lunch breaks were optional. The company's IPO was being marketed like a rocket launch, and everyone inside that building was looking up at the stars, totally unaware of the flames building underneath. Stock options were being promised like Oprah giving out cars. Employees started dressing nicer. People I hadn't spoken to in months were suddenly connecting on LinkedIn and endorsing me for skills I didn't even use anymore. It was like the smell of money was bringing out the scavengers. And all I did was sip my coffee and wait. Then, one Friday morning, the first story dropped. Sadie's voice opened the podcast episode like a hammer cracking glass. She laid out the foundation first, allegations of internal manipulation, anonymous sources citing document tampering, emails referencing fabricated growth metrics. Then she dropped specifics, the shifting budgets, the altered contracts, the backdated approvals. She didn't name names, not yet, but she named the company, Altus Systems. And once it was out there, it couldn't be taken back. By noon, the story had been picked up by 2 local news sites. By evening, it was trending in tech business circles. On Monday, the company's IPO launch was officially paused, pending internal review, which was the corporate way of saying, we're panicking but trying to look like we're not. Call stopped appearing in public. The company issued a vague statement about miscommunication and operational misalignment, but no one was buying it. The board called an emergency meeting. Legal teams started issuing reminders about NDAs. The air around that building, that shiny tower of spreadsheets and slogans, had turned cold. I didn't celebrate. I didn't dance or gloat or call anyone to rub it in. I just sat there, watched it all unfold, and thought about how easy it had been. Not because I was a genius or a hacker or some kind of digital spy, but because they were arrogant, lazy. They thought no one would ever call them on it. They thought firing me was the end of a problem when really, it was the start of a reckoning. I wasn't done, not yet. The documents I gave Sadie were just the surface. There was still more buried beneath those financials, things I hadn't shared, things I kept close, because part of me wanted to see if Kyle would try to claw his way out and how far he'd be willing to go. But one thing was certain now, the golden rocket they were building had stalled mid-air. And from where I was sitting, it looked like gravity was finally doing its job. The funny part? I hadn't even broken the rules. I hadn't lied or hacked or stolen. I'd simply kept a record, the truth, preserved in spreadsheets and emails, and handed it to someone who knew what to do with it. And for the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't felt since before the firing. Control. It took exactly 48 hours after Sadie's podcast dropped for the first real crack to show on the surface, and once it did, the rest of the structure started collapsing like a badly stacked Jenga tower. The initial statement from Altus was corporate theater at its finest, full of phrases like isolated discrepancy and inaccurate representation, but that statement was little more than a wet napkin against a wildfire. By the end of the week, one of their minor investors had gone public, claiming they had been misled during pre-IPO valuations. The story had legs now, and those legs were sprinting toward federal scrutiny faster than Kyle Moran could say misalignment. I didn't need to do much. In fact, I did nothing, which was, ironically, the most powerful thing I could have done. I didn't talk to reporters. I didn't post passive-aggressive victory laps online. I didn't email anyone inside the company with smug satisfaction. I just let the silence do its work. People talk in silence. Whispers start. Questions get asked. And when the foundation is already cracked, all it takes is a little pressure before it gives out entirely. Kyle tried to call me 3 times. The first was on a Tuesday evening while Diane and I were eating takeout on the couch, halfway through a documentary about invasive species in Florida. My phone buzzed, and there it was, Kyle Moran, flashing on the screen like a ghost from a bad dream. I stared at it for a few seconds, my fingers twitching with a mix of curiosity and spite, and then I did something I hadn't done in 12 years working under him. I laughed, out loud, and then I declined the call. No apology, no message, no attempt at sincerity. Just, can we talk? Like we were 2 old pals reconnecting over beers, not a man trying to patch a sinking ship that he personally set on fire. I didn't answer the next 2 times he called either. Whatever he wanted, absolution, clarity, a favor, I wasn't selling. Kyle was scrambling because the one thing he'd never accounted for in his neat little career plan was accountability. Within a week, Jason was out. Word was, the pressure had been building like steam in a kettle ever since the contract fiasco, and once the financial story broke, the board needed someone young and expendable to throw under the bus. Jason became that someone. They dressed it up with corporate pleasantries, mutual separation, pursuing new opportunities, all the usual lipstick on a pig, but everyone inside knew what really happened. He'd been set up to fail the moment he took my place, and now the same people who gave him my desk were dragging it out behind the building and setting it on fire. Internal audits began. The CFO went on leave, which in corporate terms is the same as a mobster going on vacation before the indictments come down. HR, bless their spineless hearts, launched a culture reset initiative, trying to rebrand the internal chaos as an opportunity for transparency and growth. You know the kind, posters on the wall about integrity, new onboarding videos full of smiling actors, and a mandatory rebuilding trust in the workplace Zoom call scheduled for Friday morning. You could almost smell the desperation under the scent of fresh buzzwords. But the people who mattered? They already knew the truth. They'd seen the cracks before the podcast, but they didn't have the evidence or the courage or the position to do anything about it. My quiet revenge had done something louder than shouting ever could. It told the rest of the crew that someone out there was watching, someone remembered, someone gave a damn. It reminded people that even when the system protects the top dogs, the walls still bleed if you pull at the right bricks. Diane and I didn't celebrate with champagne or high fives. That's not who we are. But we did sit on the porch that Friday evening, a bottle of red between us, the kind we used to save for anniversaries, and we watched the sun set across the backfield like it always had, slow, gold, and unbothered by the mess of men. She didn't ask what came next, and I didn't pretend to know. We sat in the comfort of understanding each other without needing to speak. She reached out and touched my hand, and that small gesture told me everything I needed. I didn't climb back up. I didn't get a new title or a bonus or a line of recruiters banging on my door. The job market was still what it was, flooded with half-baked opportunities, underpaid offers, and buzzwords trying to pass as compensation. But I had something better. I had clarity. I had my spine. I had a story that would never make the papers but would echo in the quiet hallways of a company that thought it was untouchable. The funny thing is, when you take the high road, people expect you to be meek. They expect you to smile, nod, and disappear into obscurity. But the high road has cliffs, too, and sometimes, if you walk it long enough, you find the perfect spot to watch the bastards trip over their own arrogance and fall right off the edge. Did I do the right thing? Maybe. Maybe not. But after 12 years of loyalty, late nights, silent sacrifices, missed birthdays, weekend emails, and watching mediocrity get rewarded while competence was labeled old school, I figured they earned at least a taste of what they served every damn day. Maybe I didn't burn the whole place down, but I handed someone else the matches, and the fire sure as hell didn't start itself. And let me tell you, that wine never tasted better.